You probably know that Dark Souls is one of the most reviewed game series nowadays and has arguably the most active player community. But considering all of this, I couldn't help myself to make another video about it, because today we're going to focus on probably the most important topic related to video games. Let me explain. Since the very beginning of video games, some of the developers here and there in the world had been stating that the video games should be considered as a form of art, and been trying to prove that with their own projects. I think it's not a big deal if we consider video games that way or not, and I also think that that's not what these developers were really trying to say. I guess they wanted to tell us that certain games can be used for a player's personal development, just like great pieces of art. Here's the idea. The player walks through a game and it teaches him some new kind of mindset, so the player could see the world around in a new way and live a fuller life. Or the game gives the player some skills, like patience, problem solving, or some weird kind of thinking that can be effectively used in daily life. Let's be honest, not too many games are capable of doing this. Video games are mostly played for amusement and created for that purpose. But one game series advanced in players' personal development more than many others, and yes, I'm talking about Dark Souls. Today we'll bring up the 3 ways Dark Souls makes us grow as individuals. So, the first thing Dark Souls can teach you is dealing with frustration and scientific approach. If you know nothing about Dark Souls gameplay features and starting it for the first time, you can become really frustrated very quickly. This feeling gets especially disturbing in the first game, since from the start you have no warping option, no way to respect your character, extremely odd humanity system and reverse hollowing and kindling rituals related to it. Merchants and blacksmiths scattered all around the world. Invisible Crow asks you for something warm and soft and gives you something in exchange if you reload the game, and so on. Because of all these, I chose Dark Souls 1 for this analysis, since even one of the Souls game is a lot to comprehend. And a big amount of players started playing Dark Souls series from the original game, so they can relate to the frustration I've got when started it for the first time. The game world works according to numerous bizarre but still knowable laws, so while playing I was constantly asking myself, what was it? What state I'm in right now? Dark Souls has so many extremely complicated game mechanics that thinking about them makes my head hurt. If you have at least some knowledge on how video games are made, you probably feel the same way. Equipment load makes the speed of your movement change smoothly, quality of your rolls discreetly, and the strength parameter surprisingly has nothing to do with any of these. If you don't have the right stats for a weapon, you probably can still effectively use it in a two-handed grip, or with some penalties, or inefficiently at all. While striving in combats, you learn that you can perform attacks even when you obviously don't have enough stamina for this, that you, as well as some of your enemies, can change the direction you strike at the last moment, and that you can't harm ghosts with a divine weapon that's meant to be effective against the dead. Weapon and armor upgrade system can easily terrify the newbies, since you never know what embers you will find, what kind of titanite will be on sale later in the game, and generally nothing is explained. You can spend a lot of souls and resources upgrading a weapon to find out that your older one still hits stronger, because your stats affect the damage of each weapon differently, and this affection will change if you get your blade modified. Not to mention the multiplayer concept that seems to be developed on some other planet. But when a player comes into Dark Souls for the first time, he knows nothing of this, and this ignorance makes his wanderings unbearable. To fix that, a player can choose a more secure path of a scholar, or a tougher path of a scientist, or a mix between the two. To advance as a scholar, you need to read and analyze those tremendous online manuals. Some of you may think, what's the big deal? All the work has been done for you. Well, let's think about it. As I mentioned earlier, vital game mechanics of Dark Souls are complex and numerous, so to have a grip on the game you'll have to deal with a big amount of text. Many of real-world schools, colleges and universities have not the best approach to teaching, and plenty of people graduate for them with a strong aversion to studying. The path of a scholar gives these people the opportunity to love studying again, since using Dark Souls manuals feels exactly the same as learning a theoretical part of some small discipline. It took me 5 or 6 evenings to find and remember all the information I needed. If you do like to study, it's probable that you don't have to deal with pretty big amounts of information daily. The manuals are very well structured. I can only imagine how much work had been done to make those, and contain plenty of lists and tables for you to remember. Since Dark Souls is known for its insanely intense combats with a little time to think, you should build your character to be harmonized with you and to feel it like the extension of your arms. That means that you can't just pick any advice out of the manuals. Everything you read should be thoroughly analyzed, and your strategy and tactics in the game must be well thought out according to your personal traits. If you do like to study and deal with big amounts of information often, it'll be just one more case to practice and test your skills. It's nice to have features like that in video games, isn't it? Now to the path of a scientist. If you don't like it easy, you can try to formulate the game's laws for yourself. This way of playing feels like wandering in a dark room full of unknown stuff in search for a light switch. Some things in the game can be analyzed easily, like the behavior of prism stones. If it lands on a sturdy ground, it begins to glow. If it falls into the chasm, it makes a horror movie scream. Simple. But some game mechanics are really hard to comprehend, like the affection of held humanity on the resistances and item drop chance. You can follow this path to be able to beat the game without prompts, or to discover its hidden mechanics just for the sake of it. Since now there are several complete manuals for each Souls game, that playing approach can be considered as reinventing the wheel. Many times during life I've heard that reinventing the wheel activities are a waste of time, but I'm sure they're not. The ability to clear things out on your own is extremely useful for acquiring new skills. Let's take playing electric guitar. There is an insane number of tutorials online, but you can't become a pro guitar player just by following them. To play freely, you have to do a lot of your own investigations. Are you comfortable playing with the pick or with the fingers? Or maybe with the claws? Do you use overdrive? How much of it? How do you place your hands? Do you heavily rely on a whammy bar or use a fixed bridge? No one can answer this to you. So, to some degree, learning any practical skill requires reinventing the wheel. See where I'm going? If you master Dark Souls without manuals, you will feel much more comfortable mastering the real-world skills, and the amount of suffering you'll have to endure will make you a more stubborn person towards achieving them. The second thing Dark Souls can teach you is rapid analysis with a strong lack of information. During the game you'll get help from all kind of odd creatures, though some more commonly looking lads can betray you and cause problems. You never know if you're facing a friend or a foe. Also, Dark Souls doesn't follow popular tendencies in terms of creatures' behavior. I faced a lot of ugly beings during the game, but despite my expectations they didn't act in a scary or disgusting way, like similar creatures behave in like 100% of mass media. Well, most of them didn't. For example, this guy has holes in his fleshy face, and I expected that maggots will come out of them or something worse, but that didn't happen. I guess he's just the way he is. Even if you've read the manuals thoroughly, it's impossible to remember each game situation and every move of each boss. You'll still need to hectically analyze what are you looking at according to your previous Dark Souls experience, bits of information you've found earlier, and your overall insight. Is this place dangerous? Can I drink Estus now? Will these guys resurrect if I die? Is this a trap? What am I looking at? A big part of modern humanity doesn't have a need to use this hectic analysis with a lack of knowledge skill in real life, so they don't practice it, though it's completely indispensable when something goes really wrong and there's a necessity to act quickly. I'm not sure if playing Dark Souls can massively save people's lives in these situations, but I think that it's a pretty confident training. At first, for the next topic, I wanted to say that everything good requires a big amount of efforts to achieve, but everyone knows that, and there are tons of videos praising Dark Souls difficulty and how rewarding it feels when you accomplish something. So the number 3 will be somehow like number 2, but still very different. The skill number 3 Dark Souls can teach you is constant calculation of risks. Point number 2 was about the tactics, while this one is about the strategy. People think about real-life risks differently. Some people try to avoid any risky situations at all, and some throw themselves into every escapade. The first ones risk to get nowhere in their lives, and the second ones to lose their time, money, land in jail or get killed. To be a successful person who's always in time, you should constantly calculate the risks and benefits of your moves. Should I save up or invest or spend my money? Should I invest my free time studying Japanese or learn Lua scripting? Should I find an extra job to earn more money for my family or spend more time with the kids? Should I wait for the bus or go on foot or run? To be happy with your decisions, you must accurately choose your major goals in life and make smaller choices according to them. Without having big goals, making smaller decisions can be very problematic and painful, and Dark Souls teaches this concept brilliantly. There are two main fields of risks in the game: playing style and leveling strategy. Or, in more details, they are slower but more secure gameplay versus more adventurous but dangerous one, and investing souls into leveling and upgrades to benefit after some build-up versus getting benefits right away. Let's talk about them separately. If you've watched this video that far, it's likely that you know the most famous game mechanic of Souls series. It's if you die, you drop all the souls in humanity right there and start from the latest bonfire. If you die again before getting them back, you lose them. Also, when you die or rest by the bonfire, most of the enemies rise from the dead. That gives you absolute freedom of farming souls. Now we know absolutely for sure that Dark Souls is manageable without farming. Some players are able to beat the game with a broken sword wearing only their underwear, but for a newbie, no farming at all can be a tough challenge. There are generally two types of risky situations. Number 1. After entering a new area, beating some number of foes and collecting a handful of souls, you'll have to make a choice. Either you venture forth into the unknown and risk, or go back to the bonfire, spend the souls and beat the enemies again, which will be easier since you've learned something about the place and the enemies. Number 2. All the roads you can go are guarded by foes or bosses that are way too tough to be beaten with certainty. For example, you have 2 hours to play Dark Souls in the evening, and you have to decide, will you spend these 2 hours trying to push yourself through, or quietly farm souls in some much safer place and try to advance tomorrow? In both situations, the second option is more reliable, but with a probability of 100%, it suggests iterations and some boredom. The first one is theoretically faster and more fun, but it has a much bigger chance to fail and get nothing, so you can end up spending even more time and making more iterations. The thing that's at stake in both cases is your real-world lifetime. I think that every player intuitively assumes how fast he wants the game to be beaten and tries to follow this deadline. To act more or less within it, you should constantly think about how effective do you spend your time considering estimated risks. No one bounds you to play only dangerously or only slow and safe. To have an interesting walkthrough in a reasonable amount of time, you should constantly examine the situations and change your strategy accordingly. I know that a lot of people on planet Earth, including me, have problems with managing their time effectively, and in Dark Souls you can go through a merciless practice of don't waste your time skill. If you're playing Dark Souls for the first time, when you find an enemy beautifully swinging some unknown weapon, defeat him and get that weapon, you'll never know how it will act in your hands. It's quite possible that in the first hours of gameplay you'll be able to collect Black Knight Greatsword. In that case, you'll probably look at it and at a dagger or a battle axe or whatever in your hands and ask yourself, should I upgrade my dagger, which suits me well except for the damage, or upgrade my stats to use this nice unknown blade? Leveling to equip the Greatsword is a long way, upgrading the dagger is not. You don't know if you will like Greatsword's speed and trajectory or not. And there is no way to redistribute your stats if you'll manage to equip it and find out that you can't stand it. I think that concept feels especially like real life. You always choose to progress in familiar ways or find new ones. The aspiration to achieve a new experience can cost you a big amount of time, and the outcome can be of any sort, from excellent to very modest. Dealing with well-known things is more predictable, but you'll probably wonder, what if there's something amazing for me out there, something I can miss? The leveling strategy is a field where you risk either way, risk to waste your time and earn souls, or to stay without some nice weapon, armor or spell that would fit you well. Also, you can make some planning and try to lower the risks by picking several different pieces of equipment with similar requirements and level up according to them. And, of course, read some manuals if you wish. In our daily life, we really need some practice in making development strategies. For many people it's tough to make these should I develop the old or strive for the new choices. And most of us were in situations which implied a choice so hard that we decided not to make any choice at all and suffered from it. So making some risky decisions like that in games surely won't hurt. Let's remind ourselves all the things we can learn from Dark Souls that were mentioned today. Number 1. Dealing with frustration and scientific approach by following a path of a scholar or a path of a scientist. Number 2. Rapid analysis with a strong lack of information. Constant calculation of risks, mainly in the fields of gameplay style and leveling strategy. The two common types of risky gameplay situations are head into the unknown or return to the bonfire and push yourself through or quietly farm. It's time to formulate a magic spell of Dark Souls 1, so let's dare to do so. It is grey walls and colorific vegetation drag us into the mutilation so we could maturate. Unexpected Postscript. Have you noticed that while being highly innovative, Dark Souls strongly relies not even on classic, but on outdated game mechanics? Like the one that doesn't allow you to ascend a tiny sandhill, but makes you easily run along a ramp like this one. Or walk an absurdly narrow parapet. This refers to old action games like Half-Life or Crusaders of Might and Magic. And the enemies that sometimes get stuck in the surroundings, or the AI acts really stupid if you choose a right spot to stand on, or they can't follow you past some conditional line allowing you to easily defeat them. But in Dark Souls these things don't feel wrong. In the opposite, since the game is really hard, it's very satisfying to find flaws like that. It makes a player feel really strong and smart for the moment. Also, I just can't stay silent about the amazingly thought out covenant system. Every player can intrude to the other player's world, and there is a covenant that punishes the intruders. There is a covenant that spoils other players' worlds, a covenant that helps everyone out, and a covenant which members can grow themselves freaking dragon heads and more. The very idea of the covenants is already enough to make everything whirl. And finally, I want to make a claim about Dark Souls and edify some young developers. To enter the covenants and to advance in the game's plot, sometimes you have to interact with different beings by praying, kneeling, and making sacrifices to them. As a religious person, I don't feel comfortable doing these things, and if I was not making a game analysis, I would try to totally avoid most of them. I know that there are whole communities of religious players around the world, and some of them may dislike these virtual cult initiations even more than I do. If some players face a spot in the game that requires a virtual religious initiation to proceed through the main plot, they can just quit the game for good. I think game developers should be aware of it and use them with great caution. That is all for now, thank you for watching. Tell me your thoughts on whether video games can improve our daily life. Do you have a game that has taught you something really important? It is still very surprising to me, but one game learned me to establish close relationships with people and really helped me out in the first year of my marriage. Maybe I should make a video on it? Don't hesitate to subscribe and leave comments, I do answer pretty much all of them. Stay tuned, there's more game magic to come.